Scaling Climate Action, Core Primitives and Innovations. We have Will from the Celo Foundation, Stephen Haft, Alan Ransil, and Phil Fogel. Can we please welcome them on stage?
Awesome, awesome. Thank you, everybody. So my name is Will from the Celo Foundation, and I am joined on stage by an illustrious panel. I will actually ask them to go down the line and introduce them a little bit and talk about their work as it relates to climate and sustainability. So why don't we start with you, Stephen?
Thank you. My name is Stephen Haft. I work at ConsenSys. Busy week here in Paris for ConsenSys, where we are an organization founded by one of the co-founders of Ethereum, in my case, I have the privilege of working on our climate agenda, such as it is, and specifically in the last year, we have focused on this transition from proof of work to proof of stake, and how, looking back on the 7 years of proof of work, we can give back to the planet what we might have taken from it in that period.
Awesome. Love that. I'm Phil Fogel. I'm one of the co-founders of FlowCarbon. FlowCarbon is a company that was founded about 2 years ago with the intention of helping to scale the voluntary carbon market using Web3 technology. So we focus specifically on tokenization of spot carbon assets to help drive access, liquidity, transparency, and price discovery. And we also focus on early stage financing solutions for carbon projects and trying to figure out ways to build out the entire capital markets stack that is yet unbuilt for carbon markets, and to build that as a Web3 primitive and primarily built on Web3 rails.
My name is Alan. I am part of a project called Filecoin Green, which is at Protocol Labs. We started out by connecting the Filecoin network to renewable energy in order to make the Filecoin network itself verifiably sustainable and reduce its emissions. And we've broadened the scope of what we're doing toward data provenance and verifiability in general with environmental claims. Right, so our contention is that we don't have very good tools right now for doing the sort of end-to-end traceability of data-driven claims and data-driven decisions that we really need, right? And so we need to build those primitives into Web3.
Can I take a minute, if you don't mind? And
Please.
I just want to say what a privilege it is to sit with these three up here. But in particular, I want to point out that, and Phil would agree with me, I'm sure, that Filecoin and Celo, when we talk about there being such a thing as a community around climate, Filecoin and Celo have done so much to create and lead this community. You know, Phil and I built stuff. We built stuff that's kind of market related very much. In both of our cases, I think we're very focused on the carbon markets. But the community, you out here, you're here because of Filecoin Green and because of Celo. And I think Phil and I owe a great debt of gratitude to both organizations. So thank you both.
Definitely.
Thank you. I promise we did not pay him to say that.
And also the many amazing people that we work with, who many of whom are in the audience, are fantastic. And we would not be here, right, without all of the incredible projects in this space that are really, really pushing ground, like the Ethereum Climate Platform and FlowCarbon, and a ton of people, as I look out and see, people are doing really amazing work. So,
yeah, and it's been sort of in the carbon market side of things, it's been a very slow burn over the last 18 months since it came out really strong fall of 21, and then ever since then it's been sort of like this as this market prepares itself for Web3, right? The voluntary carbon market has frankly undergone a massive transformation in the last year and a half, where they have truly embraced the idea of learning about Web3 and learning about blockchain and how blockchain can be applied to the entire value chain. So we all started out sort of in this carbon market of just like, oh yeah, we want to tokenize spot credits, we want them tradable, we want people to have access to them, we want a little bit more transparency around them. And what's happened is actually much faster than anticipated. The carbon markets have looked at the entire value chain of a carbon credit and all of the different pieces that can be built on Web3 tech. So while we're focused on financing and spot markets, there's actually the entire origination process, the actual issuance of carbon credits, the traceability of the data. Obviously, that's a big piece of what Filecoin is working on, and connecting all those pieces together using a new infrastructure stack that they were previously, frankly, just unaware of. And so it's really been an interesting thing to see this entire community stay together and be supportive of that process that's just taken a long time. So very appreciative of everyone here.
It has taken a long time, and I would say at the end of that long time, and I think you'd agree, is that what we find is finally acceptance, but not market share. And it operates more like any of you who've had experience with B2B sales. It's a long sales cycle, but it is true that by comparison to a year ago, and I would say that the transition of Ethereum to finally, I mean, I represented ConsenSys and therefore to some degree Ethereum at the United Nations for the last 5 years, and we're a brown tech. It was a lonely job, but things have, no question that things have changed in the last few months.
Well, let's unpack that a little bit. I'm curious about what you said, that we have acceptance, but not market share, or what will it take to get to that market share aspect?
So first, the acceptance is almost there, right? I would say that we're on like the 5-yard line of acceptance. And so we need to first finish that. We need to get it over the finish line, essentially. And with the standards bodies that we're working with, so Vera and Gold Standard being the 2 largest and collectively 85, almost 90% of the voluntary carbon market, once they get there, right, now we have to actually show them that it works, right? And that's going to be really incumbent upon the entire community to come together, because the real use case for carbon credits is an institutional one, right? It is corporates who buy these, and it's corporates who are going to continue to buy them. And if we go into Article 6 stuff, it's countries that are buying them. And so the adoption on that side is actually going to be even slower, because corporates are just not ready to directly jump into Web3 yet, right? They're getting there, and it's going to be 1, 2, 3 years before they do so. And so in the interim, it's about showing that there is still this demand set on chain, that there are protocols on chain that want to build on top of it. We've been going around promising the voluntary carbon market that, bring these things on chain, you make them programmable, people will program them and use them in various different use cases. And you're seeing that. Celo is truly one of the leading examples of this, which is they do protocol level offsetting, right? So we've actually spent a ton of time going around to every L1 and L2 and saying, follow their example and do protocol level offsetting. Build it into your chain directly so that the chain, just every single day, some amount of rewards, some amount of money goes towards buying an offset. It doesn't actually have to offset your emissions. It's just planet positive, and it's good business, right? And so we need to continue seeing that from every builder in the space, to just, when these things are really available and out there, just turn it on, buy a little bit.
Yep, plus 100. But Phil, I'd like to maybe play devil's advocate on what you said on acceptance, right? Because as we all know, the voluntary carbon credit market has undergone a lot of turbulence lately, right? There was that Guardian article that was pretty scathing against Vera. Delta got hit by a greenwashing lawsuit. How do you think those things have influenced the ReFi space and the perception of ReFi? And this is for everybody, actually. Yeah.
I mean, listen, there are some crises that you actually are events that you've been waiting for, in our case, for several years. In a way, we've been waiting for these crises because it's a crisis of the data not being trustworthy. And I think if there's general agreement in the world, a world that really doesn't understand most of what Web3 is up to, there is a sense that it is a more trustworthy source of data verification than the others that are being used. So in a way, this is a crisis made for this panel.
Yeah. No, 100%. Those two questions are closely related, right? Like how have these crises affected ReFi, and what is the game plan or like the roadmap for ReFi to gain not just acceptance, but also actual market share, right? So I think, that really comes back to what can we do that Web2 tech can't do, right? And like I was saying a few minutes ago, we don't have good systems for making an environmental claim, right? Saying this company is carbon neutral, saying this regenerative farm offset or sequestered this much emissions, or saying that my scope 2 emissions, my emissions due to electricity, are canceled out, and actually tracing that claim verifiably and rigorously back to all of the constituent data that went into it, right? And we can build those tools in Web3, right? We can content address everything. We can take this sort of intersection, right, between content addressing, functional programming, and machine learning, right? And really take these data streams that people are making claims on now, but they're making those claims based on Excel spreadsheets and PDFs that are like emailed to people, right? And so if you wanna make some claim and you say, okay, our company or our event is carbon neutral, and you want to trace that back to really where did the information underlying not just the electricity use of that event, not just the guest lists of who was there, but like if you bought offsets, like who actually did what on the ground in practice to back up that claim, that infrastructure just doesn't exist, right? And we can build that, and if we build that, we can gain market share, because that actually is going to solve these problems, this sort of crisis of transparency in not just the voluntary carbon market, but also sustainability claims more broadly, right? People in the UK are getting sued right and left right now for making bad environmental claims in the market, right? There's example after example of people losing faith in any sort of corporate sustainability claims. And the way forward, right, is Web3. The way forward is establishing data provenance and using the extremely powerful tools that we have to overhaul how people talk about environmental claims that are backed with data generally, right?
Yeah, so the thing that's been known in this market for a long time is that every carbon asset is not created equal, right? And that there needs to be a level of standardization. And once that level of standardization comes in and is linked back to good data that can tell you what the actual mitigation claims should be on that carbon credit, you can actually develop market mechanisms. And I actually gave a talk here on this stage last year, specifically talking about how one of the biggest problems in the carbon market, the legacy carbon market, is there's no ability to short, right? You know, pair trading, and I think I gave this example last year, pair trading is a common thing that's done in equity markets, right? I think Delta is gonna outperform American Airlines, so I go long Delta and I short American, and I'm Delta neutral, I'm hedged against any other risk factor in the broad markets and in the airline market specifically. It's just, now I'm looking at just those two. If you could do the same thing in the carbon markets where you basically say, I'm gonna go long credits that I believe are high quality and have really good claims against them and go short this other stuff, those things will ultimately, the free markets will take care of it and put it out there. But because those free market mechanisms aren't really available in the carbon market today, it's really hard to do that. And so with very limited liquidity and very little ability to actually sort through what you're getting delivery of and what exists, that's one of these things that Web3 can help solve. And so this data availability is key to that being true, because right now it's really hard for anyone to actually go and look at a carbon credit and say, did this meet its claim? Because it's PDFs, it's spreadsheets, it's not accessible data, and we need to make that data machine readable.
I think these are all great points, but I want to zone in on something you said about standardization, which is something that people talk about as a constant problem in the voluntary carbon credit market, right? Do you see a tension between standardization and this concept of decentralization? And how do we reach this point of standardization in the VCM market?
Yeah, I don't see too much tension there. I think that over time, the standardization is it's gonna start out with there being a lot of different buckets, and you know, in the lingo of what we're building, bundle contracts that have eligibility for certain kinds of carbon credits. And as there are more operators of carbon credit bridges and there are more native carbon credits delivered on chain, there will be over time more and more bundles created. And so it'll look decentralized. And then over time, what's gonna happen is these things are gonna very hopefully condense and consolidate down, because they will become either irrelevant or they will become the same as other ones as these things move towards one carbon credit is equal to one ton of carbon.
I think that you could break that down too into just data model standardization versus standardization as to what actually makes a carbon credit good, right? And I think that we sometimes veer off course when we reinvent the wheel too much, especially in coming up with our own standards for things like environmental claims, right? I think that one of the things that we'd really like to focus on is taking this great work that's being done across other industries, right? And people who spend their entire careers thinking not about Web3 and sustainability, but about just sustainability, right? And are doing really good work and have been doing really good work for decades on trying to figure out like what standards do we actually write in order to differentiate carbon offsets from each other. So I'm thinking about things like the ICVCM, which are doing a lot of this effort in order to clarify, if 1 ton is not equal to 1 ton, how should we actually grade that, right? And then I think we can, by making things machine readable and by working amongst ourselves in order to build the data models that are necessary to actually make those comparisons, we can then get that sort of scale that you're talking about, Phil, for being able to make a lot of those determinations automatically.
Standards are the what. Standards are what we're aiming at. Decentralized solutions is how we're going about meeting them, and there will be any number of approaches to how, hopefully all built in Web3 and all prioritizing the importance of decentralization in each in its own way. But it's the how, it's not the what. The what is we need standards, and we need to be aiming at a consistent set of standards, or there really, I don't think there's going to be an effective way to solve what we need to solve in the next couple of years for this planet.
Okay, that's very, very interesting. So we talked about the what and the how. I would love to dig deeper into the who and the when, actually. Because Alan, you mentioned we need to build these standards, we need to talk about this. But I recognize that we are in a little bit of an echo chamber in this room, right? So who, in your opinions, are missing from this conversation that need to be here in order to actually make this effective?
I mean, an experiment that we ran to try to solve this problem was we had the most recent Sustainable Blockchain Summit attached to a energy conference rather than a crypto conference, right? Because we wanted to make inroads with the folks at the MIT Energy Conference and an MIT Energy Club. So, I think that's an example of what I'm thinking about, the sorts of bridges that we need to build, right? In order to get out of our echo chamber, we should, go to more of these just straightforward sustainability, carbon credits, climate finance, climate tech conferences, right?
Yeah, so we plan to our flagship event in between Climate Week in New York, when the UN UFCCC is meeting, and mainnet. So we get the crypto community, we get the climate community, and we're in New York, so we're also bringing the finance community. What's missing from this conversation, and by the way, I actually don't think it's missing from this panel potentially, but it actually is not really missing from the conversation. All of these conversations do take this into a place. We need the corporates who are going to buy them. We need the demand side. We need the financiers who are going to actually make them possible for these assets to come on chain and live at scale. And then we also need the legacy players in this market. Right, the people who have been here for 20 years working really hard to build what this market is today, they need to be a part of this as well, and the standards bodies. In fact, I'm pretty sure that there's a panel later today between Rafa and Hugh from Gold Standard. So the conversation is happening, right? And it's just about continuing to educate all the different stakeholders in this market and to bring them together into the same room. So continue doing events like this and inviting people.
I don't think anything's missing for a somewhat different reason, in that I'm looking at you not as the moderator, but as Celo. Celo has 400,000 active addresses this month from what I saw on that slide that Rene presented at the outset. I bet 60% of them are in the Global South, if not 70% of them in the Global South. So I actually think this panel is very representative, because I would have said that what might be missing are the sort of community stakeholders on the ground, but I'm saying you're that, okay, in my view. Celo is that. That is the role that Celo can play and does play in this conversation, and I would like to see, and one of the reasons we're very happy to have you connected to the Ethereum Climate platform is that that's the role that we see sort of supercharging Celo to perform in the years ahead.
No, I totally agree. We're very excited about this move to the Ethereum community. I think there's a lot of value we could bring and a lot of value we can gain from joining efforts. So thank you. So I'd like to talk about the win a little bit. Phil, you mentioned that it's been a slow burn, right? Steven, you talked about, I don't know if this is going to happen in the next year or so. So if not in the next year or so, when and what will it take to get to the point where we finally say ReFi has found product market fit, or we've achieved scale? What does that look like?
Well, let's try could we take a slightly different slice at it, which is, especially as we're getting sort of more than midway through this panel, what is this conversation going to look like next year? You referred to something you said last year. And I'll start out by saying, Next year, I think we're going to be talking about, because he and I focus on sort of two different parts of the carbon market. I focus more on innovating in the context of the Paris Agreement. So for me in the next year, I think something you've never heard of, Article 6.2, is going to be what we're going to be talking about, is where our accomplishments have come in the next year. Article 6.2 is a subset of the Paris Agreement. To show you what a tiny subset of the Paris Agreement it is, Paris Agreement has been around for 8 years, born the same year as Ethereum, 2015. In 8 years, there have been only 8 deals done under Article 6.2, 6 of them in the last 2 months. But that also says something about velocity. People are starting to focus on deals between 2 countries, not deals under the formal Paris Accords themselves. If Thailand or Ghana can agree with Switzerland on a verified approach to a carbon mitigation, then that becomes legitimate under the Paris Accords. As the Accords themselves have stalled in terms of innovation, individual countries are starting to step up as partners, often partnerships between the global north and the global south, industrialized and less industrialized countries that are beginning to redefine the art of the possible. And that, I think, is where, at least for ECP, you're going to find us talking about things, hopefully, we got done.
Yeah, so just in case anyone doesn't know how 6.2 works, countries make these NDCs, these commitments to how they're going to reduce their carbon footprint. And oftentimes, if it's cheaper for them to meet that commitment by sending money abroad to someone else who's going to reduce their footprint below their NDC, then that's how the 6.2 works, is those 2 countries can bilaterally engage with each other for a transfer of value, for a transfer of carbon mitigation. Right, so that's how 6.2, and then there's 6.4, which is even more interesting. Potentially, we may never see it actually come into play, which is that these standards will actually be issued whereby there's almost a free market in which countries can actually go and negotiate instead of just bilaterally to do this. So very similar construct to how the voluntary carbon market works, but meant for country-to-country interactions. And I do think, hopefully, right, after COP this year, we'll see if this is true or false, that next year a lot of the conversation will be around Article 6. And I think for us, I'm very hopeful that by this time next year, there will be live carbon credits on-chain available for multiple participants in the Celo ecosystem, bringing those on-chain. And the conversation will largely be about how do we drive liquidity, and how do we drive demand, and how do we bring corporate users to the ecosystem to actually start doing their offsetting in a standardized, more efficient way.
And yeah, I think, it's a slow burn on average, right? But when you take the wild market cycles in sustainability and the crazy market cycles in crypto and convolute them, it's sometimes it's a slow burn and sometimes it's an inferno and sometimes it's a total freeze or you're hurtling into space backwards. Yeah, I mean, a year from now, we're going to have living carbon ledgers, right? So we're going to have a thing where you can say, what is this claim? What was this claim when it was made? Show me all of the data that went into that claim when it was made, and show me how that data was updated yesterday, right? We're going to go from satellite data or data that was collected on the ground by people measuring trees, or data from all these different sources, right? Like real-time power meter data, and just have that actively and dynamically filter through these sets of functions to update your environmental claims in something close to real time, right? So that's what we're going to have in a year, and that's what's going to 10x the utility of Web3 carbon offsets as compared to traditional carbon offsets, and that's how we're going to win.
Love to see it. Love to see it. So, I mean, I could talk about this for hours, but I'm being told we're running short on time. So I'd like to thank the panelists and then ask maybe a lightning round of any closing remarks or calls to action for the crowd.
Yeah, something that's been coming up in a lot of conversations recently is voluntary carbon markets versus compliance markets. Right, so voluntary markets, the VCM, is 1% of carbon emissions instruments that are issued, right? And so I think a lot of people are sort of reflexively concerned about anything to do with compliance and regulations. But it's a big area that our tools are really well set up to do carbon accounting in. So some people are starting to really look closely at that, and I'd recommend checking it out.
I'd like to make a just quick call to action for everyone in the audience to either build something that interacts with on-chain carbon, or to, as you see carbon assets coming on-chain, to immediately start interacting with them. Own them, trade them, provide liquidity for them, and most importantly, retire them.
And I want to leave here and do a T-shirt quoting Griff, who was on the earlier panel, who said, crypto isn't what we do or why we do it, it's how we do it. I just think every now and then you hear somebody really kind of capture an idea. I don't know if Griff is in the room, but hats off. It's nicely done.
Great, thank you so much. Let's please give it a round of applause to our panelists.